I'm Matt Buey, and I'm here with Dan Yungblut, who is the head of research at Dynamic. And Dynamic Funds manages close to $200 billion of people's money. And Dan's going to talk today about ESG, environmental, social, governance, positive impact. And I thought we'd do just another way to give people hope that with climate change, that we're in a pickle. To be sure, climate change is real, but there are positive things happening. So Dan, can you talk just a bit about what you're seeing in terms of positive things happening with climate change and negating it?
Absolutely. So, and maybe we can start from the investment industry lens. And we obviously have an important role to play in terms of allocating capital to help solve problems for society. And if we think these trends have been developing for years, we've seen clients have an interest, but it wasn't necessarily showing up in product or flows or real action on the ground. I can say just in the past 18 months, we've seen that accelerate. We're seeing a lot of flows go to these types of mandates, which gives us hope. It helps inspire the asset managers to make sure they're on top of all these issues. But increasingly, I think most of our peers that we consider strong actors have invested a lot in ESG infrastructure to make sure they're considering these factors to push companies to make a difference, improve their behavior. And just we're engaging with companies and we're seeing that action on the ground.
Okay.
And we're seeing companies that we're still not sure they're good actors, but they're starting to ask us for input into how they approach it.
Okay. And what's motivating that? Obviously, they want the capital, but are they just being very nice people? What's going on?
And so I think the hope is for all of us. And then, so for the longest time, we've had a delicate balance in our traditional mandates in that we're managing people's savings, have a fiduciary duty to earn a risk and reward. But increasingly for us, we're viewing good performance on ESG and long-term business fundamentals as synonymous.
Nice.
It's hard to see a bad actor that we'll have confidence in is going to have long-term sustainability or really be able to sustain their financial performance long-term. And so we're seeing bad actors. They're losing. They're having a higher cost of capital. Investors are starting to instill that discipline.
Nice. All right. So it's like the bad child, and the parents finally the message is getting through, and that child is starting to grow up.
Yeah. Now I would say, look on that because it is impacting cost of capital. We're seeing a lot of companies virtue signal, put out a statement like we want to reach net zero.
Right.
But once you start peering under the hood, it takes really active investors engaging with management teams and distinguishing between those that are taking tangible action on the ground versus just putting out a statement. As an example, I can think of two big oil sands producers. Both have put out net zero statements. They want to reach net zeros by 2050. One of them, for years, has already been investing significant amounts of capital in carbon capture and storage, alternative forms of power, and renewable power. These are tangible, and they set milestones for themselves. The other one put out a statement.
So which company is that?
Yeah.
That's good.
So we can talk about Canadian Natural Resources or Suncor Review within the oil sands as leaders on that front. I won't mention the name of a bad actor, but when I engaged with them for 2 hours, it was clear they put out the statement, and no one in their capital planning sessions is even thinking about that net zero commitment or doing anything tangible on the ground to take steps.
Talk is cheap.
Talk is cheap. And so we're seeing that. And then on the ground too, with from the asset management space, just we're seeing, look, a lot of our peers we think are investing in infrastructure, doing a great job. A small minority of our peers put out the statements, marketing documents, all that, without anything under the hood and on the ground infrastructure to actually consider these issues.
So on another area that we were talking about before is policy. So I'm just trying to give people hope that, yes, climate change is real. We do need to clean up our act, literally. What do you see is happening out there in terms of government policies, corporate policies, things like that, to make things more positive and better?
Yeah, and so I'd like to think most of us that are, do our research and think about this, want to help the environment get better, think about these issues, help solve them. What I find positive, I think, is society is moving beyond the debate whether climate change is real or not, towards what are the best solutions, what's the best way to deal with these issues. Because when we were stuck on whether it's real or not, then when we got through to actually policy, a lot of the time it's just, okay, well, there's only one solution, let's just do this, rather than, okay, let's take our time to actually debate what are the best policies based on research. Let's do that. I think we're getting to that point now, which where I think now we're going to be able to leverage science and the collective input to determine what the best policies are. I think you and I were talking earlier.
Right.
A good example is, let's take plastic bags and all plastic waste. That the obvious solution, if you say there's a problem or not, is just let's just ban it all.
Right.
Which the science and data says may not be the best solution.
So don't ban all plastic bags.
Not necessarily,
Okay.
but think about it holistically. So there's research that you have to reuse the same cotton bag every week for 200 years.
Every week for 200 years.
Yes. To
So
have
you're
the same-
passing it on to your grandchildren, your great-grand.
Yes.
That's
to have the
insane.
same carbon impact as reusing a new plastic bag every week for those 200 years, which is mind-blowing.
That is.
Because of the carbon intensity of producing that cotton bag, the full cycle, getting it to market, whereas plastic production is actually quite efficient now. Now, I'm not saying plastic bags are great, let's run with them.
Understood.
But let's have research about what is the right mix of different materials in our economy, but also think about full cycle. Let's invest in plastic recycling and having different types. And let's have more research on this rather than just assuming ban is there. And another one is, so there's a lot of plastic waste in the oceans.
Yeah.
Now, 90% of that waste comes from 4 rivers in the world. So if
Four
you,
rivers
yes,
in the world.
Yes.
Wow.
So let's just say you ban plastic there, but don't improve the recycling infrastructure, how you're managing the full life cycle of all this packaging. You just end up then with metal waste or some other type of packaging waste
Right.
in the ocean.
Okay.
So it's not just in isolation. I think
Yeah.
the other big, very positive thing we're seeing with policy and this debate is thinking holistically
Yeah.
about these issues.
Okay.
And so if we're thinking the plastics issue, as an investor, we want to help make a difference. We're engaging with consumer companies, the ones producing the plastic waste, to make sure that they're now thinking about how can they support the full managing of that, increasing the recycled content in packaging, but also then the design of their packaging.
Right.
So you're not just saying this is the big flashy thing, and yet you end up with a massive amount of waste just for marketing purposes.
Got it.
Let's think, hey, we can balance between appealing to customers, but also being efficient with their packaging to reduce the amount of waste,
Nice.
more recycled content, engage with waste management companies
Okay.
to invest in recycling infrastructure, sorting technology, and improving that.
Okay.
And then I also contributed to Conference Board of Canada research
Okay.
on how do you attract more private capital into investing and increasing our capacity for recycling.
Got it.
And so we talked about extending producer responsibility.
Yeah.
So regulatory-wise, making the consumer companies responsible for how that packaging ultimately gets handled
Right.
and filtered out, and increasing the requirement for more recycled content in packaging, which I
Okay.
mentioned.
Yeah.
But then also improving how we license and contract with waste management companies.
Got it.
Give them more certainty of demand.
Yeah.
So now they're willing to invest in cutting edge sorting
It's a
technology.
positive cycle.
So all these things have to be part of that, rather than just let's ban plastics.
Okay.
Think about holistically.
Got it. And you, in our conversation previous to this interview, you had mentioned office buildings. And
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on what's going on
Yeah.
with office buildings?
Yeah, obviously the most visible source of carbon emissions for us all is cars on the road and
Right.
transportation, oil and gas production. And there's a lot of obviously technology being introduced to help with electric vehicles and other things reduce that.
Yeah.
But other big sources we don't think about are, say, cement production, steel, other industrial uses, but also then real estate.
Okay.
So I think most people are familiar with different building codes like LEED and others, platinum certified, where it's really setting standards for environmental efficiency.
Okay.
So reducing the amount of power that's being used in the building. If we retrofitted even a meaningful percentage of all of our office buildings in North America, it's the equivalent of taking all the cars off the road.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, and that's kind of the relative source. That cars transportation is total less than 20%, depending on the measure
Sure.
of our carbon emissions.
Yeah.
Real estate and power production is a huge part of that, and real estate one of the biggest consumers. You increase efficiency there,
Okay.
you're having just as much impact on
Yeah.
the environment too. especially when you think about an electric vehicle still has a carbon footprint.
Of course. Okay. What do you do with the old battery?
And to produce the lithium, everything for the battery. So it's about holistically, let's not just focus on one area.
Yeah.
What is the most efficient way of allocating capital? And also, another big evolution, I think, is trying to be smarter with policy about aligning, reducing emissions with what is people's incentives are.
Right.
So with electric,
but hold on,
Yeah.
and I just want people to get this.
Yeah.
So you were saying to me, if you retrograde all of the office buildings out there,
Right.
and so now they're efficient.
Yes.
That's the equivalent of taking all the cars off the road. Did I understand that?
Well, and converting all to electric vehicles, exactly.
Wow.
So there's so there's a lot of really big impact initiatives you can have rather than just cars.
Right. Got it. Okay.
And the reason I mentioned this alignment of incentives too, and why I think this holds so much promise, is electric vehicles right now. You're trying to convince people to move away from a combustion engine to electric.
Right.
So you're kind of using incentives to get them to do that. I'm not sure if you told someone you're going to reduce the energy consumption of your building, so your power costs go down.
Right.
Your cost of ownership and tenant and being a tenant is lower. That's fully aligned.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you're helping reduce emissions.
And
so look for projects that are again aligning, and just you maybe need a bit of subsidies up front, but the impact of that and ongoing, the incentives people's buy-in is just so much better aligned.
Okay.
That I think those are powerful other ways to think about it.
Got it. So just to wrap this up, it sounds like you're more positive than negative in terms of looking at the future. I've got kids. I hope to have grandkids someday. I'd like to leave them a nice planet.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And again, I'm very hopeful. Just we're starting to again move beyond is it real or not, to put our best minds towards what are the best solutions now.
Right.
But also thinking holistically, it's no longer just about cars or the oil and gas sector. Across the economy, how to reduce emissions.
Got it.
And also think for us as investors, the way we want to look at it is, I think again, moving beyond just, hey, I care about the environment, let's exclude oil and gas.
Right.
Then you're starving them of capital, you invest in a technology company that's not doing anything. What difference have you done, as opposed to more positive inclusions?
Right.
If we're going to wean ourselves off oil, retrofit buildings, we need to give the companies money to do that.
Right.
That requires positive inclusions.
Right.
So think about actually companies, what are they going to do with that money to solve problems, which matters on the ground. And then secondly, you can't just say, I like renewable power. Give it to the companies that are actually going to successfully develop it in efficient ways and do that. So that requires looking for the best management teams, best quality, because you can give it, and even also look for companies that are actually evolving their profile. The example we use is Next Era Energy. We really like it. One of the leading developers of renewable power in the world.
Okay.
Some people didn't like it because at the time they had legacy coal-fired power or a bit of gas-fired power.
Okay.
But you give them money, they're developing hundreds of megawatts of renewable power, moving the needle to move our whole economy in that area of the world off higher emission forms of power.
So that's a form of evolution as opposed to
exactly
revolution.
Positive inclusion versus I could give the money to a small renewable power company.
Right.
Looks great right now versus someone with a bit of coal-fired power. Well, they may develop 1 or 2 megawatts. Who's really going to make the difference and move the needle?
Absolutely.
Move beyond just where we are now to where we're going, and think holistically about the issue when you're allocating capital.
Wonderful. Dan, on that note, thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
It's been great. Thanks very much.